Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, the two candidates in the U.S. presidential race faced off in their first of 3 live televised debates. Both sides aired the jibes frequently heard on the campaign trail. But was there a clear winner? And will the debates affect how people vote in November? And the Colombian government and FARC rebels signed a historic deal this week, ending a half-century of armed conflict in that country. The Colombian people are next to decide whether they accept the deal or not. For the very first time, the two candidates for the U.S. president faced each other in a debate. Republican Donald Trump and Democrat Hillary Clinton argued over taxes, trade, and U.S. foreign policy. But did they convince the American people? Let's take a look at this.
Within minutes of taking the podium, the former U.S. Secretary of State went on the offensive. Hillary Clinton attacked Donald Trump on giving tax breaks to rich Americans.
He really believes that the more you help wealthy people, the better off we'll be, and that everything will work out from there. I don't buy that.
Clinton helped negotiate the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement, which links 12 nations across the Pacific, but not China. She now opposes it, but Trump questioned whether she will continue to do so.
Now, you want to approve Trans-Pacific Partnership. You were totally in favor of it. Then you heard what I was saying, how bad it is, and you said, I can't win that debate. But you know that if you did win, you would approve that, and that will be almost as bad as NAFTA.
In the opening stages of the debate, Trump once again accused China of devaluing the currency and using the U.S. as a piggy bank to rebuild it. He said China is stealing American jobs and claimed that he could get them back. The debate also covered foreign policy. All along on the campaign trail, Trump has maintained that he was against the Iraq war. But both Clinton and the debate's moderator pushed back.
Donald supported the invasion of Iraq.
Wrong.
That is absolutely
wrong.
Proved over and over again.
I was against the war in Iraq, just so you put it out.
The record shows otherwise.
The record does not show that.
Why is your judgment
The record shows that I'm right.
That led into a debate on how to counter the terror group ISIL, both at home and abroad. Clinton has laid out a 9,000-word plan promising to go after ISIL's leader. Trump says his strategy to defeat ISIL is a secret.
Just go to her website. She tells you how to fight ISIS on her website. I don't think General Douglas MacArthur would like that too much.
The next segment, we're continuing the subject of...
Well, at least I have a plan to fight ISIS.
As many as 100 million people in the U.S. watched the debate. Opinion polls show the candidates are running a very tight race, and the debate could sway undecided voters. The next presidential debate will be held on October 9th in Missouri, with the last scheduled for October 19th.
For more discussion on the first U.S. presidential debate, this time we are having in our Beijing studio Rick Dunham, the co-director of the Global Business Journalism Program at Tsinghua University, formerly a Washington correspondent for Houston Chronicle. Welcome, sir. In Chicago, we are joined by Laura Schwartz, joining us from the Democratic National Convention arena. Welcome. And she is also a political commentator who worked at the White House during former President Bill Clinton's tenure. In Washington, D.C., also from the U.S., we have Mr. Brandon Andrews, a former U.S. Senate staff and also director of Impact, a nonprofit organization that develops political skills for young leaders. Welcome as well. Well. The first debate has done. So, what do you make of this nature of this debate? Is it likely to help us really understand who is likely to be the next president of the United States of America? Ms. Schwartz.
Well, it is just fabulous to be back with you and these two distinguished gentlemen, Brandon and Rick. I think that the debate last night was incredible. Incredible for the American people. Like you mentioned, up to possibly 100 million people watched. 7 million people interacted on Twitter and social media, 19 million people on Facebook, and today is National Voter Registration Day in the United States, and that says so much for getting people out to vote and involved. Now, as far as getting people out to vote one way or the other, and if the debate changed the minds, I think this is going to be a very tight race to the end. Those undecided voters that are looking to the debates to really shape their vote, I think will evaluate all three debates, just like you said, 2 more upcoming.
That's right. let's see some numbers to understand who is likely to be the winner this time and also how important debates are in U.S. presidential elections. A new Wall Street Journal NBC News poll found 34% of registered voters think the 3 presidential debates, including this one, will be extremely or quite important in helping them decide whom to support for president. Meanwhile, a CNN ORC poll of debate watchers released after the event found 62% felt Clinton won compared to 27% for Trump this time for this very first debate. Mr. Andrews, I also understand there are other poll numbers coming from other media organizations suggesting the gap smaller, and some media organizations even suggested the other way around when who is having an upper hand. What do you make of the result?
Well, I think the debate certainly reflected the campaign styles of Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton certainly had some substantive policy points to put forward. Donald Trump was able to put forward some interesting memes and some interesting points to connect with folks in a different way than Hillary Clinton did. I think if you look at who put forth policy points, certainly Hillary Clinton probably wins there, but if you look at perhaps who was able to connect with some of the more pressing concerns with Americans around the country, Donald Trump probably won there.
All right, I'm sure we have different opinions from the other side of the aisle, but for now, let me go to you, Mr. Dunham here in Beijing. What is this about? Are debates about real issues, or are they about debate techniques? Are they about temperaments vis-a-vis contents, or are they about moving the undecided voters, no matter who they are?
Well, it's a little bit of all, but mostly it's about sizing up the people, personality, person. Which person looks presidential? Which person would you trust in a very difficult situation? Issues do matter. Telling the truth does matter. Some of the other things, I mean, appealing to undecided voters, obviously you could see both Donald Trump and Clinton were trying to appeal to undecided voters, Trump on trade and Hillary Clinton on policy. But there are 3 debates. This was the first. I think it was clear that Hillary Clinton was superior. It was the most one-sided debate I've seen covering debates since 1988. But there are 2 more. People who have had bad debates have come back later. So I think we need to wait.
Give me examples.
2 good examples. 1984, Ronald Reagan had a very bad first debate against Walter Mondale, his Democratic challenger, and then he clearly won the final debate. And then in 2008, the last election, 2012, Mitt Romney was clearly superior to Barack Obama in the first debate. Barack Obama's team told him that he had messed up, and then he came back and had a superior performance in the second and third debates.
Let me also talk about a little bit about the styles between these two. There is clearly a division, it seems, about the performance between the first half and the second half. Mr. Andrews, Mr. Trump was pretty much offensive during the first half, particularly talking about trade, and yet his performance changed suddenly, many would say, during the second half, becoming much more defensive and blurring, trying to responding to what Secretary Clinton said. Do you agree with these kinds of angles?
Well, I agree that Donald Trump was able to raise some very salient points and bring to the forefront some concerns that are on the minds and hearts of Americans across the country, asking Hillary Clinton why, after she spent most of her adult life either being able to directly influence public policy or in a way to be able to push public policy, is she just thinking about some of these problems now? Why aren't things better? I think that's an overarching concern that many Americans have that he made earlier on in the debate. Donald Trump is not as skilled at this type of interaction as Hillary Clinton is, and that certainly showed. But to the other guest's point, he'll have 2 more debates to be able to make up some ground there.
Is it about skill or is it about the content, Ms. Schwartz?
It is both, because you have to show the temperament to be president on that stage. You know, the first televised debate was Nixon-Kennedy, and those listening on the radio said Nixon won. Those watching on television said Kennedy won. So it really matters. And again, with this enormous audience watching and seeing Donald Trump consistently interrupt with nothing new to say or policies to put out there, it just wasn't very effective. And yet he claimed victory. His team claims victory. His team thinks that he needs to do exactly what he did last night in the forthcoming debates.
Wow.
But when you look at the polls of who the undecideds thought they won, I really think that Donald Trump needs to watch tape of his performance last night, watch his interrupting, and answer the questions that are asked. And when you do that, when you tell the American people why you are saying what you are saying and explain it to them, then you've got a much better chance to both look presidential and prepared.
Interesting. According to the recent analysis from New York Times, this is the number I got from them, 29 times interruption by Donald Trump of Hillary Clinton. The other way around, 10 times by Hillary Clinton toward Donald Trump's speech. And yet we see it is not just interruption, it's two different styles of debate and two different styles of performance in front of the public. Mr. Dunham, some were suggesting what it should be the strategy from both sides toward one another, because they certainly have absolutely different styles.
Well,
one is very much going out there, pounding. The other is much more about, I want to be the president.
Well, to me, Trump has a strategy that I would call chaos theory. His whole idea is to go beyond truth. It's the world we live in is very dangerous. He wants to make people fearful and angry, and he is the only one on the stage who's strong enough to solve our problems. While Hillary Clinton is the opposite. She wants to focus on issues, and she wants to focus on the fact that she has solutions and she says Trump doesn't.
But Ms. Schwartz, many people also wonder whether Secretary Clinton did a good job or not in terms of fighting back, particularly during the first half, facing Donald Trump's generalization and also negativity in his proposals, and the accusation against her, later facts many checked, not necessarily true to a certain extent. And also, when you have an opponent what some call with extreme incivility, how the other one should react to that. I'm only quoting people's adjectives, not necessarily my opinion. Ms. Schwartz.
Well, I think you react and you move on. You looked at how he reacted to comments with smirks and the side smile, rolling his eyes even at one point, where she stayed composed and smiled and just tried not to let it bother her, especially on the outside to the American people, because she wanted to get back to the policies. She is policy oriented. He is personality oriented. I think it's best to stay on the questions that are asked and put your proposals out there. And I think she was able to really pick up on the taxes point of view, that for the last 40 years, those running for president have released their tax returns. And she really, I think, got him on that point, and that turned the whole debate. When she made it in a different argument that I ever heard her say before, she said, now there could be a few reasons why you're not releasing them. And one of them was, perhaps you're paying 0% income tax. That means you're paying 0% for our vets, for our military, for education. And I think that framed up the tax release debate in a different way, because taxes do pay for the proposals, and you are responsible to the taxpayer to use it wisely. So I think that's when it really turned into her favor.
Well, but on the other hand, we have seen Mr. Trump has this very forceful one-liners, particularly during the first half of the debate. Well, Secretary Clinton went on with lengthy answers, very much accused the styles of so-called establishment and elites of Americans. Mr. Andrews, what do you make of these kind of styles? Is it a competition also between styles and the belief of what politicians should be like?
Well, it's a 90-minute debate. A lot of words were said in there by Trump, Clinton, and by Lester Holt. And I think Trump's ability to be able to distill down the feelings in the hearts and minds of Americans, and being able to deliver those solid one-liners consistently is something that's going to stick in the minds of Americans over the next couple of weeks as they prepare for the next couple of debates, and as some Americans actually begin to do early voting. So it's up to Mr. Trump whether or not those one-liners are going to be positive or negative. If they are positive, if they're connected to substantive policy proposals, then they will hopefully, buttress his campaign.
Okay.
But if they're negative, if they're things that he says that are offensive, etc., those will stick in the minds of Americans as well, and those aren't going to do anything for him in terms of getting more people to vote for him.
That's right. Let me go to one specific question about the content. We understand sometimes campaign rhetorics are just going to be different from the policies eventually one candidate comes into the White House and becomes the president. But some of the clues of their future policies can be studied through what they said during the debates. Ms. Schwartz, about 10 times Mr. Trump mentioned about China, and of course all of them in the negative way. In comparison, we saw only several times from Secretary Clinton. When she mentioned it with some of the other countries as well. What do you make of this difference?
Well, I think it's the same difference where Donald Trump says that China created the hoax of climate change, which if you watch the fact-checking going on last night, he certainly said that, though he denied it on stage. I think Hillary said it best when she said we're 5%. And we have to work with the other 95% of the world when it comes to trade, when it comes to national security. And you have to treat countries as such. I think that's why when you saw her talk about the partnership with our allies, again, national security, economy, and trade can be a very positive thing. Ford had to tweet out last night, one of our largest automakers, correcting Trump that no, they're not moving jobs from America to Mexico. They are still building cars here. In fact, 2 new small cars. So I have to say, I think Brendan's right. Donald Trump was giving his one-liners, a lot of what we've heard in the campaigns, and that will really invigorate his own voters that he already has. But this is about the undecideds and the very strategic states that may figure out this electoral mathematics when it comes to November.
Well, China has always been a very easy target. We understand throughout the campaigns over the past few generally blamed for whatever things that the country or the people have not done. Having said that, though, Mr. Andrews, what do you make of these accusations? Does that, in a way, reflect the simplicity or generalization of Mr. Trump's policy or proposals?
Well, I agree we should be working with our partners all across the world. We should be building relationships with folks. But the reality is that the trade deficit with China is real. The fact that at times, the nation of China has inflated currency or deflated currency to their benefit, and the fact that there are significant security concerns both with the supply chain, with counterfeit goods being made, and also with Taiwan and the Senkaku Islands in Japan. So there are some significant issues there. However, we absolutely should be building relationships with folks, and we shouldn't blame one country for everything negative that's happening. We have to be able to balance it. And as president, whether it's Ms. Clinton or Mr. Trump, they're going to have to be able to balance it in office. But I think we can't gloss over the fact that there are some significant political, economic, and security concerns with our relationship.
Chinese are not electing the U.S. president. So it's Americans to decide what kind of president and what kind of country they want. But as a journalist who's been working here in China for a long time, educating your journalistic students, what do you make of these kinds of debates involving a third target? Very briefly before we go to other topics.
Well, I think that China brought out the best and the worst of Trump politically. Politically, it was good for him to talk about the trade issue, to talk about currency, to talk about lost jobs. On the opposite end, brought out the worst in him when he was blaming China for everything bad in the world. Like you said, Russia might not be involved in the hacking of the Democratic National Committee. It might have been China. Well, that's ridiculous.
Well, we wouldn't go into those detailed accusations because we know this is very political, and we are not going to debate about that. Eventually, U.S., you elect your president. Final question for the three of you, very brief answers from you, but very important answer, I would believe. Both Donald Trump and earlier Bernie Sanders are described as candidates against the establishment. How many Americans are still interested in presidential elections? Are we going to see more American voters come out this time? Are Americans still interested in their politics? Ms. Schwartz, briefly.
I think they are re-engaged as of last night, and I am really proud of I'm very hopeful of the effect that these debates will have on the conversation around policy and in the break rooms of American workforce today and in homes around the dinner table. I'm very optimistic.
All right, and also Mr. Andrews.
Well, we had 100 million folks watching the debate last night. I think whether you like President Obama or don't like him, one thing that he's been able to do is get people interested in politics and policy, and I hope that either Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton will be able to seize on that positive momentum that Mr. Obama was able to create during his campaign since he's been in office to ensure that we're going to be engaged in the future, because governmental efficacy is absolutely critical for the democracy to work correctly. Yeah.
Mr. Dunham.
Well, historically, negative campaigns have driven down turnout. I think this is going to be a different kind of year. I think that Americans are really plugged in. The majority might not like either candidate, but I think we're going to have a very high turnout, and it's going to surprise people.
And I think we just had a wonderful debate with civilized panelists, all having their fair share of time. Thank you so much, Rick Dunham, Laura Schwartz, and Brandon Andrews. Really appreciate for being with us. All the best to the American people, I guess, in this regard. Thank you. Stay with us here on World Insight. Still to come, peace is finally in sight for Colombia as the government and FARC signed a historical deal ending over 50 years of armed conflict. Yet many, including a former president, opposed the deal. Will the public ratify the agreement, and how smooth will the transition to democracy be for the rebel group? You are watching World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. Monday was a historical day for Colombia as its government and the largest rebel movement officially signed a peace agreement ending 52 years of armed conflict. This day comes after more than 4 years of negotiations in Havana. The two sides came to an agreement on 5 points: rural development, FARC's participation in political life, the end of conflict, the struggle against the drug trafficking, and reparations to the victims. This story brings you more of all of these details.
No more war. The chant was shouted by the 2,500 men and women witnessing a historic moment for Colombia, the signing of a peace accord to end 50 years of armed conflict. The ceremony took place on Monday in the coastal city of Cartagena. The FARC leader, known as Alias Timochenko, said in his speech that the armed group would not give up its left-winged ideals, but would pursue them without arms. He also paid tribute to the more than 6 million victims of the armed conflict.
In the name of FARC, I offer my apologies to all of the victims of the conflict and for all of the suffering that we may have caused during this war.
In front of 15 Latin American presidents and other international leaders, such as the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, President Juan Manuel Santos welcomed the FARC guerrilla group into Colombia's democracy.
Como jefe de Estado, as the head of this nation that we all love, I give you a welcome to democracy.
In Bogota, citizens celebrated the live transmission of the signing. The thousands present chanted, "Yes, we did it," when they saw the government and FARC, two longtime enemies, shake hands.
Look, I have goosebumps. It's fascinating. It was about time to say yes to peace. We need to go back to our territory, and this is the first step.
It's exciting to witness this peace agreement because my generation lived through war. We are already grandmothers or mothers, and we're happy to know that our grandchildren can have a country at peace.
This is the best path for our country, because if we kill each other and destroy our country, this nation won't grow or move forward. Now with peace comes hope for our kids and our grandkids.
After 4 years of peace negotiations, it seems like the accord will have one more challenge. On October 2nd, the Colombian people will go out to vote. In order to ratify it, they must vote yes. Michelle Begue, CCTV, Colombia.
And for more on this, we are joined in London by Mr. Arthur Daunt, who's a senior analyst on the Americas at IHS Country Risk. And also in the UK, in Newcastle, we have Andreas Abadia, who's a senior international economist at Penton Macroeconomics. He is a native of Colombia. Welcome to both of you, gentlemen. I would like to start by asking your thoughts on the final peace deal, 52 years. Mr. Abadias, if the presidential debate inside the United States attracted a lot of eyeballs, but when look at historical importance, really, this is the thing on Monday. Mr. Abadias.
Yes, thank you for having me. Yes, I think that is very important. This is a turning point for Colombia. It has ended 52 years of war. More than 200,000 killed and displacement, a lot of tragedy over all these years. So I think that this is good news for Colombia, and the peace will bring prosperity, I believe. At the beginning we will have cost. The cost of longer term have obviously economic and especially a country in peace will bring investment and more positive things for the country.
What do you make of it? We are also now joined by Eric Farnsworth, who is Vice President of the Americas Society and Council of the Americas. Mr. Farnsworth, of this historical deal, it seems.
Absolutely. This is a game changer for Colombia and for the international community in Latin America. That's the end of the longest, one of the most violent military conflicts in Latin America, and it really gives new hope, I think, to Colombia and to the region as a whole. So this is a historic event. I don't think the impact can be overstated.
But having said that, though, how much hopeful should we become, Mr. Daunt, about the prospect? I mean, everybody is there invited, that they play ode to joy, you know, they have a pen to sign the peace deal made from guns, very significant, very moving, but this is the ceremony. The next step is going to be implementation and the national vote for it. Will that be done?
Well, it does seem that there's a long way to go, no question about it. This is just the first step.
If I could have Mr. Daunt to go first. Sorry.
The first major hurdle, of course, is the referendum on Sunday. The polls have been up and down. Recently, the two major polls that we've seen from Gallup and Ipsos in September show between 67 and 72% of the population supporting the agreement. Now, in Colombia, polling is notoriously tricky. There's areas which are hard to reach, and there's areas which will be under influence of various illegal armed groups who may have an influence on the vote. But at the moment, at least based on the polling data, it looks like the agreement will be approved.
Mr. Abadia, Havana has played quite a significant role over the past 4 years in hosting the negotiations. How much role do you think did they eventually have in terms of making things happen? In other words, what are the factors, particularly international factors, likely to influence the implementation and future of this peace deal?
Yes, I think that Cuba will play a big role in the implementation, but also countries such as the U.S. and I also think that China can also help in all this process. So I think that Colombia needs support from the international community, and I expect that we will see this over the coming years.
Mr. Farnsworth, U.S. did, of course, play a role, particularly after U.S. and Havana becoming closer than they used to be, eventually having a positive impact for the negotiation, even for Colombia's peace deal. But how much role will U.S. play, especially you have a very unpredictable presidential election right now?
Well, that's exactly right. The United States has been very active in the Colombia peace process since the beginning. On a bipartisan basis, the United States has supported the prosecution of the war against the FARC and also the smaller guerrilla group, the ELN. But as the peace negotiations have gone on, the United States has been alongside the Colombian government to try to facilitate that. You know, I would anticipate that whoever is elected in the United States on November 8 is going to continue to see Colombia as a success story, is going to continue the United States support for peace. And in fact, the implementation of the peace accords is probably going to be more difficult than actually going to war. So the fact is, U.S. and international support is actually going to be more important in some ways for the full implementation of the peace accords, and I would anticipate that will continue.
But Mr. Farnsworth, if I could remind you that the United States used to regard the FARC forces as terrorists, it seems that that has not been changed so far. So what would that mean? Will that become one of the most important uncertainties?
Well, that's exactly right. In fact, the FARC is still called a terrorist organization by the United States. Secretary Kerry in Cartagena yesterday said that that decision could be reviewed over time. But we have to remember, look, yesterday was the signing of the accords. The Colombian people have not yet accepted them, much less begun to implement them. So we have to see going forward how this happens and if the FARC indeed upholds its end of the bargain. And I think the United States at that point will react accordingly.
I see. Mr. Abadi, I want to go back to you and ask that question also. We've seen some track records, at least some countries claim, suggesting the United States not necessarily trustworthy when it comes to political and geopolitical deals, such as from Iran, such as from somewhat from Havana as well. Do you think, what is likely to be the U.S. role after you listen to what Mr. Farnsworth just explained?
Yeah, I think that the role still is going to be very important. Remember that the narco traffic is still in Colombia. It won't disappear. There are also other groups which are, against the government, like the ELN. So definitely, I think that the involvement will continue, and they will try to help as much as possible. So I don't think that that it will be easy. That we will see a diminishing influence from overseas, in this project.
Mr. Dong, what do you say?
I must agree with our other two guests. I think the U.S. Involvement in Colombia is going to remain very large, not least, as Andrea mentioned, as a result of the drug trafficking. Cocoa production has almost doubled in the last couple of years to almost 400,000 hectares. There's going to be a considerable amount of work there to do to deal with the drug trafficking. And as Andreas mentioned as well, there are other groups which continue to operate in the country, the ELN, but also some of the more transnational drug trafficking organizations, which impacts the United States national interest. So involvement will remain pretty strong. And secondly, economic trade between the US and Colombia is very large. For Colombia, the US remains its largest trading partner. So even if we're not going to see the kind of interventions that we've seen in the last few decades, those economic links and those strategic connections to deal with the drug trafficking and smaller armed groups is certainly going to remain.
It's very interesting that this Colombia successful story, at least for now, of a peace deal, resembles that of the Iran deal with many other countries in ways that it has many parties involved, all played their share of possibility in order to get the peace deal. For example, that also including Mr. Abadia, as you said, China. Chinese Premier Li Keqiang just had the talks with the Cuban leaders, and also a year ago he visited Colombia. The two sides pledged to deepen economic ties aimed at boosting trade and also investment. If we take a look at some of these numbers, China has quickly become Colombia's second largest trading partner after the United States. Premier Li also pledged $8 million in aid to help Colombia maintain peace in that time war-torn rural areas if peace deal negotiations succeeds. How significant will that be, Mr. Abadia, for Colombia with China's pledge?
Well, I think Colombia with the peace agreement becomes a country more open to diplomacy and foreign investment. Colombia has obviously close ties with the United States, and that will continue. But there are more areas in which Colombia can expand its investment, and can be other countries can also have some partnership. So the new peace process leaves the window open for China to increase the diplomatic relationship, and also to start, building up a stronger economic relationship. There is a lot of investment that can be done in the agribusiness, in the primary sector, mining, for example, in infrastructure. And remember that Colombia is in a particular geographic advantage. It has ports in the Pacific, so it can serve as a doorway to the rest of South America. Right. So there are many advantages, and there are many opportunities that can be drawn, from this peace agreement.
Right, Mr. Dong, we see some interesting phenomena here. United States and Cuba have very strong impact on the political scenes going on in Colombia. Well, China and the United States, both countries have big impact on the economic and trade scenes going on in that country. What do you make of these, three countries likely to play their roles in the future? If we could, in a way, trying to figure out what Colombia, how is likely to be impacted?
By the maneuverings of Cuba, China, and the US.
Yes, indeed. Of course, there are a lot of different kinds of relations going on among the three, but we're talking about its impact on Colombia. So what do you make of eventually these three countries' role for Colombia peace deal, which of course is the most important story of today?
Well, I think there's certainly a follow-through process which is going to last several years. Trust isn't going to be rebuilt in Colombia automatically. In Cuba and the US, particularly because they've been involved in the process for the last few years, will have a strong role to play in reassuring both the government and members of the FARC that the implementation of the process is possible, and to help them with that. Obviously, China has come in at a slightly different stage, but I think its role can be equally important, but possibly more on the economic side than on the political side. What we would probably want to avoid is China and the US playing themselves off on each other for economic reasons, for example, and what would be more beneficial for Colombia, at least, would be for greater cooperation, so it doesn't become a zero-sum game between China and the US, but both countries can prosper with a positive relationship with Colombia.
We got 2 minutes to go, but I think there are some very important questions to ask. Mr. Abadia, what do you think? Will FARC eventually be accepted as a political party? Will the FARC leader Timoshenko, as being called and nicknamed, when he asks for forgiveness, will people really forgive? Or actually fights are likely to pick up again because of future disagreements on certain details? Mr. Abadia.
Yes, I think that people hardly forgive what they have done in the past, but I think that the government will try to implement all the things possible in order to let the FARC to get into politics in the country. It's going to be a hard task. I don't think that they will gather a lot of the people in Colombia, I don't think that they will try to vote more for them, at least during the first decade. There are a lot of resentment in the country. But I think that the government of Colombia will try that they will do politics as other parties.
I see. Mr. Farnsworth, are we going to see a really successful story this time? Is this going to be a successful case study for many of the other countries with conflicts to torn the realities?
Well, I certainly hope so. Look, I was part of the Guatemala peace process 20 years ago, and I was there for the signing, and there was a huge national catharsis and hope and optimism. 20 years later, Guatemala is a country that is in real crisis, politically, economically, and from a security perspective. So we know that just because there's a peace process doesn't guarantee success. There is going to be a lot of hard work required for Colombia. The fact of the matter is, however, that the Colombians themselves know this. They've committed to going forward. They've learned the lessons from the past. By and large, I'm optimistic. It doesn't mean that this is going to be easy or cost-free. It's going to be very difficult. But at the end of the day, I think the Colombians themselves are going to vote for peace, and I think that's the direction they're going to want to go.
After 50 years of conflict in the country, finally there's a peace deal. That is certainly a great story, at least for today. Thank you so much, the three of you, Eric Farnsworth, Arthur Daunt, and Andreas Abadia. Really appreciate, gentlemen, for being with us. Congratulations to Colombia, by the way, Mr. Abadia. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of our program, visit our website. Just type in World Insight CCTV News into your search engine. You'll be able to find us, or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again tomorrow for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night.